Welcome back, Raw Thoughts listeners, to another episode with me, Mackenzie Tiggs. Today, I have the pleasure of getting to interview Michael Sugrue, co-author of Relentless Courage. Guys, this is an amazing book. I was able to read it myself. You know that I am a huge advocate for first responders, mental health, and really being able to share their stories. He was able to write this book with Shawner Doc Springer. So I want to turn it over to you, Michael, and just tell us a little bit about your book and what you got going on.
Well, first off, this book is I never imagined it. So the way this book came about, let's just talk about that first. So years back, right before COVID, Doc Shauna Springer, I didn't know her. We were connected on LinkedIn, and she had seen the work that I was doing, and she just wanted to introduce herself. So we set up a phone call, and during that phone call, she talked about stellate ganglion block, which is a medical procedure to treat the physical symptoms of post traumatic stress. And I didn't know anything about it, and honestly, at that time, I was kind of skeptical. But since then, I've had the procedure, and we talk about this in our book. But the second half of that conversation, I told her my story of trauma and recovery. And after that, she actually asked me, like, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I kind of laughed a little bit, and I said, "Well, I've thought about it, but honestly, with post traumatic stress, I just feel like I'm burnt out. I don't have that motivation, that drive, or that focus to get something like that done." So we just left the conversation at that. And a couple months later, she hits me back up and she said, "Look, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of trauma stories in my work as a clinical psychologist, but your story is really sticking with me. And your story, I think, is going to help save countless lives." And she said, "I want to make this book a reality and I want to do this book with you." And so, not even having met her, I knew in my heart that it was right. I knew that she was the right person to do this with. And so we said, let's do it. And we started. COVID happened. We never met in person. We did it all via Zoom for the first year. We literally did Zoom meetings for 2 hours every single week. And the format of the book is very unique. I don't know of anything else out there like this. And basically, every chapter has two distinct parts. The first part is my story told in my voice, all the way back to childhood until present day. And the second half, Doc Springer comes in and she breaks everything down. She explains it, but in very easy to understand terms and layman terms, so that anybody reading this book, whether you know a first responder or you don't, you're going to truly see the impact of the jobs that we do, and you're going to see the human side behind the badge and the uniform. And so, this book, and it's blown up. I mean, literally, it was a bestseller for over 20 weeks. It's literally just, it's being sold all over the world. And I'm getting messages every single day on relationships being saved, careers being saved, lives being saved. And this book is just, it's something else. And I know, and you've read it, but anybody that picks this up, once you start, you're not going to be able to put it down. I mean, I assure you of that.
Yeah, I talking about the format, that actually is one of my favorite things about this book because you do get to hear your voice and then you get to hear the clinical side of that too. And it really
Yes.
brings it together of understanding what is happening in our first responder communities. And I this year one of my goals is to read a book every single month. And I had this book read in like 2 weeks. It was so amazing. I literally was, at a cabin. I was like, you guys, I have to read this. And I'm just writing notes and like everything was just coming to me because I resonated with it. A lot of the things that you're saying, we hear time and time and time again, but it's now in writing. And you get to continue to read it and you get to continue to say, I'm not the only one that has these struggles. I am not the only one. And he spoke up and I'm speaking up and look at all of the support. And that is the amazing thing.
Well, that's the thing is that, I suffered in silence for over 4 years, and during that time, I thought I was the only one. I thought that nobody would understand me or the feelings that I was having, and it turns out that it was all normal. I mean, these are normal feelings and reactions to the horrific things that we have to see and deal with on a daily basis. And, the average first responder over a 20, 30-year career, we're being exposed to upwards of 500 or more critical incidents. I mean, where you look at like a normal person, we all have trauma, we all see bad things, but most people may have 1 or 2, really traumatic experiences in their lifetime. And here we are talking about over 500 just on the job, and not to mention, we still have all the personal trauma and experiences that everyone else had, whether that's financial issues, health issues, family problems, marital problems, issues with our children. So that's the thing is that, going through my recovery process, when I finally got the strength and courage to ask for help, that's where I realized that I'm not alone, that there's countless people out there just like me who are going through the same things. And, I tell people often that I'm not special or unique, nor are my experiences, but what is unique is that I'm willing to openly talk about it, like with no holds barred, like the good, the bad, the ugly. It's all out there. I literally bare my soul in this book. And that's what's different is that fortunately, I know not everybody can do this, but I'm in a position where literally I have nothing to lose. And I'm putting it all out there, hoping that it helps other people.
Yeah, I love it because you're being raw, right? This book is very, very raw. Talk about the details that you go into your history within, your career and what has happened. But just reading this, it is real. You're being authentic and you're willing to share. And that vulnerability right there is bringing you the support to you and all of the other first responders around us, which is amazing. And even if you are not a first responder, I encourage you to read this to understand truly what they go through. Like you had mentioned, the amount of times of traumatic incidences that we see on top of just the regular, normal day to day, just bullshit, within your agencies, within the pay, within, leadership and command staff. Like there is so much turmoil and stress around this. And yet, first responders are the first ones to not ask for help.
Exactly, and that's the thing is that suicide most people don't realize this, but it's the number 1 killer of all first responders. If you look at year over year, like last year and this is reported, and these numbers are greatly underreported, but we had 160 reported just law enforcement suicides last year alone. I think this year we're close to 40 as of right now, and I estimate these numbers are probably 3 to 4 times underreported, but then you add firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, and Blue Help is a nonprofit that's kind of been instrumental in tracking these numbers. And if you go all the way back to 2016 when they started tracking these numbers, we're close to over 1,200 just law enforcement suicides that have been reported. And that's why we need to bring this out. We need to just, talk about it because that's kind of like what's so ironic is that talking about things really is the solution and normalizing these conversations. But we have such a stigma within both the military and first responders that, hey, if we talk about our feelings or emotions, that's a sign of weakness and it's shameful. When in reality, it's just being human. And I
Mhm.
think, we need to embrace our human side because we do care. That's why we signed up for these jobs in the first place because we want to make a difference.
Yeah.
And as much as we want to pretend like we're disconnected and we're not going to let this stuff affect us, it does affect us. Every single call that we go on slowly is building up until that tipping point, and we never know when that is going to be or what incident is going to push us over the edge.
Yeah, absolutely. I have heard, and experienced one of my EMTs. It was what I would call a very routine call, and that happened to be what sparked it. It does not have to be these extravagant, critical calls, multiple agencies. It can be something very routine, but it is something that continues to bring it up because it is the weight that over and over and time again that it weighs on you. And I've heard, the analogy so many times of, every incident you're putting a rock in your backpack. But what are we doing to actually take those rocks out of our backpack? What are we
Absolutely.
doing to, relieve that heaviness?
As an example to kind of illustrate it so people can see what you just mentioned is that if we talk about what people consider physical injury, so like a lot of first responders have knee issues, back issues, shoulder issues. As an example, I had some back issues when I was working, some back pain, and some incidents I can look back on where I pulled a back muscle or I strained it. And then years later, one day I literally just stepped off the curb and I felt this sharp pain in my back. And it wasn't that stepping off that curb is what caused it. It was that there was years of micro trauma that had built up in my spine or my back that I hadn't addressed. And it was getting worse and worse. It was just that particular moment where I stepped off that curb that it chose to reveal itself.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you said. And here's the other aspect of that is that I advocate for post traumatic stress injury versus disorder because it's a proven fact that repeated exposure to trauma it causes a physical change and a
Mm.
chemical change to the human brain.
Yeah.
And with that, we can get better, we can recover. There's things that we can do to fix that injury. No different than a bad shoulder, a bad knee, or a bad back.
Yeah.
And those are accepted, right? But
Yeah.
why isn't it accepted to address the mental injury?
Yeah. And it shows to you, I mean, being a paramedic, like people will be like, what's your favorite organ? I'm like, the brain. And they're like, what? Like, I like the heart or, the endocrine system. And I'm like, the brain literally can change shape and structure. And it's doing that to protect us. And it's doing that to, help us protect our outsides as well, but it also hinders us. And if it can change shape to learning, we can also learn to reshape it. And that is the just incredible part about our brain is that just like our muscles, you tear them down and you break them down, but they also build up. And no, you can't see. There's not something that even right. You can't go into Walmart and get like a scan of your brain like you can get your blood pressure. But the people around you and you can feel the differences. And that self awareness is just huge because that is where those shapes are changing in your brain.
Absolutely.
I want to read, a little passage, and we had kind of talked about this within the culture of first responders. And a couple sentences in this book says, as a rookie, I wanted to show my peers that this didn't bother me. I needed them to trust me and accept me as part of their team. I want you to elaborate a little bit to the listeners that maybe aren't in this and why that phrase is so important for us to start dissecting.
So I talk about the very specific incidents in the book, but I'll say this generally. So when I was a brand new police officer and I was on FTO, which is where you're right out of the academy, you're teamed with a senior veteran officer who's supposed to train you and show you how to do the job out on the streets. And we had gone to, I mean, a couple really horrific calls, and they were disturbing, they were disgusting, um, things I'd never seen or dealt with my entire life. And it really was caught off guard by them. And I remember after the incidents, my training officer joked about it and we kind of laughed it off. I mean, and that's where I learned quickly that within the culture of all first responders, so I'll say dispatchers, paramedics, firefighters, cops, we use gallows humor because if we joke about it, it's kind of like a defense mechanism to say, look, yeah, that was pretty gross, man, or that was pretty cool, this stuff isn't bothering me, and it's a way to show that, you're kind of a badass or, nothing bothers you, but in reality, it's like, "Oh, man, that was really, like, disgusting and really messed up, and I kinda have to process this or talk about it," but when you're new, you're gonna go with what the senior officers, especially the training officers, the example that they're setting because that defines the culture. If you realize that, hey, I have 5 training officers and they all joke about this stuff, well, then that must be the culture where I'm working. And so either I get on board with that culture and I do the same thing, or I buck the system as that brand new person. And nobody wants to be that guy or that gal that's like, wait a minute, boot, like, didn't you just graduate the academy 2 weeks ago? And now you're trying to tell us how to do our job or how we should talk about things. And, this is where I talk about later on the solution is that we need leaders at all levels, especially our training officers, to set this example early on and show their humanity, show their vulnerability, and have these open, trusted discussions. Because I think if we do that, these incidents, we just go through them and we digest it, we get it off our chest, we move on to the next one, and we can go through a full career and come out healthy on the other side. But when we don't do that and we joke about it and it bottles up and bottles up and bottles up, then it gets to that tipping point that we first talked about at the beginning of this interview. And really, That's the culture then. Things are changing, but we still have a lot more work to do.
Yeah, there's a lot more work to do, and that's why I'm so happy that you're on board and being so in front of it, and continuing to get a louder voice around this because it affects, both you and I. We have a tie to this. I have never, been in the situation of wanting to commit suicide, but I've gone to the suicides. I've had these phone calls with people. Have seen my own people struggle and not getting the help, and it worries me, and I know that I have, that, oh, well, you're a young girl and, duh, talk about your emotions. I'm like, no, this is no bullshit. And if I do have to be that person, then I'm fine with that because there is a problem, and with our first responders dying more by suicide than anything else, there is a solution. And there is a cure to this, but it's gonna take some time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, Gallows humor is so interesting though, because it is a coping strategy and it's a coping strategy that we do very quickly. And a lot of times we don't realize we are doing it. And I do say, it can help for a short amount of time. It can help where you're going from call to call to call to call, and it's kind of a quick, easy mechanism to do. However, that then needs to be something that, oh, wow, I joked really heavily on that. And that was not a good joke I made when you kind of debrief yourself. And that's where, really taking the time and the effort to process what you have seen and what you have dealt with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, I want you to share just a little bit brief. I don't want you to give away all of the details of your book because I want people to buy this and read it and really understand you. But tell us a little bit about your journey through being a police officer.
I was prior military, so I actually served 6.5 years in the United States Air Force. I went in as lieutenant with my college degree. I was in security forces, which is basically law enforcement, anti-terrorism, force protection, foreign airfield assessments, nuclear security, a whole bunch of things. I served in Europe, South America, the Middle East. I got out in 2004 as a captain, and I went straight into civilian law enforcement. I worked a bunch of different assignments from just patrol officer to training officer, detective. I was undercover on a state drug task force. Eventually was a patrol sergeant and a PIO. So I've done a lot of different things, but to go my interest in law enforcement started as a child. I mean, literally when I was 8 years old. And I was one of those people that always had a plan. I always had a path. I knew exactly what I needed to do to make each level that I wanted to attain. And I literally was on that path. I was promoted very early on as a patrol sergeant. My career was off the charts. My life was literally perfect back in 2012. And the night after Christmas, 2012, I was involved in a very traumatic incident. It was a fatal officer involved shooting where a man with a butcher knife was trying to kill a couple that was barricaded inside a condominium and then tried to kill myself and my fellow officers. And that incident set off a series of events from a federal lawsuit to marital problems to health problems to just you name it, to where my life got to the point where I didn't want to be here anymore. I literally wanted to die in the line of duty. I literally wanted it's the opposite of suicide by cop. So I wanted suicide by bad guy. And
Mhm.
that's how bad it got. And like I said, it was 4 years of that suffering and literally almost losing every single thing in my life. It was another very tragic incident that pulled me out of that darkness. But, my point is that I had a path, and that path suddenly changed on that night, the day after Christmas, 2012. And once that happened, my path was no longer what it was. It went somewhere totally different. And, ultimately, I medically retired in 2018 for post traumatic stress injury. And I thought that was it. I never envisioned any of this. But I realize now that this is my new path. And this is my way to still be involved in law enforcement and the first responder world and to give back and try to help other people.
Yeah. And I think it's very important to note that, even though that you are out of it right now, your years and your time and your, you know, professional growth within this shows your dedication to it. And, a lot of first responders are always afraid of, well, when I get out of it, I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't have a gun, on my hip and I don't have this badge and these are the things and I don't have any skills. You have more skills than you could ever imagine to be able to do. And I appreciate you being the voice of saying, hey, I've been in it. I've dealt with it, but we're also gonna make a change.
Absolutely. Well, for me, it's a calling. It's like I believe in a higher purpose, and I feel like I was called to this, just like I was called to law enforcement in the first place. And let's be real. I could have literally just medically retired, had my pension, and gone away quietly and never talked about any of this stuff. But I felt a series of events have happened again to make this all happen, and I feel like it's happened for a reason. And so, as bad as all of this was, I think I'm in a better position today because of it. I think I'm a better person. I think I'm a better father to my daughter, a better partner because I look at things differently. I'm more empathetic. I'm more compassionate, but I'm also more appreciative of the simple things around me. I remember back when I was working in law enforcement, I became so pessimistic. I had such a negative view of the world, and I judged people because I had to. I literally had to size people up and judge them in a matter of seconds. And in my work, my own recovery, but in my volunteer work with like the West Coast post trauma retreat or going through Save a Warrior, I've met a lot of addicts and alcoholics who are first responders. And so I don't judge those people anymore. I now look at all addicts and alcoholics as in, I wonder what happened with them. I wonder what trauma they faced, that brought them to these decisions. And most often than not, even criminals, most people aren't evil. Most people aren't bad. They're making poor decisions based on their circumstances. And like I said, I look at that differently now. And that's kind of freeing. I mean, to walk around in such a negative, pessimistic view of the world, it's not healthy. And that
Mhm.
alone takes a toll on you.
Yeah. Before your incident, like I said, you had a lot of professional growth. What were you doing for your personal growth through all of these years? Were you having other bad coping, mechanisms? Were you keeping a good stance on things prior to the incident happening, or what did that look like?
Well, I made a lot of mistakes. Let's just say that first of all, and I talk about these in the book. But one of the biggest mistakes I made was early on in both my military and law enforcement career, and that was that I would never bring the job home. I thought by doing that I would be protecting my family. I'd kind of shield them from the ugliness that we have to see and deal with. And so instead of coming home and just having that open lines of communication saying, look, I had a really bad day today. I went to a horrible car accident and I saw this kid and in the crosswalk that got hit. And I just, I need some time to decompress and some time alone. Just let me go take a shower. I'll be back down and we can talk about the day, see how you're doing. But I didn't do that. So when I came home in a bad mood or pissed off because of something that happened at work, my family was walking on eggshells because they thought it was them and they were blaming themselves. They didn't realize that it was what I had to see and deal with because I never told them. Because, like I said, I thought I was protecting them, but in reality, I was hurting them and I wasn't building that trusted relationship with open lines of communication. And that's one advice that I'd give anybody watching this or listening, because it's not too late to
Yeah.
start right now, is that you can't keep it in. You can't keep it from your family. Let them know why you're upset or why you're having a bad day and let them know and reassure it's not them, it's what you saw at work. And I'm not talking about the gritty details. They don't need to know all that, but give them
Right.
a quick synopsis and just so they understand and so they can be compassionate and they can also help you get through it,
Mhm.
because your family is much more important than the job. And I ended up losing my marriage. So I lost that because I didn't have that established relationship. And when it came time when I needed my wife the most, she wasn't there for me because, why would she be? There was all those years of me just being an asshole and coming home pissed off. And now all of a sudden, 8 years later, I need you. I want to talk to you. It's like, well, it was too late.
Yeah.
So, gosh, just Start that now. And here's the beautiful thing about this book. And I've heard this from countless people. I've had couples, whether they're married, dating, engaged, but you have one read it first, then you have the other person read it, and then they come together afterwards and they have a discussion for the very first time about these issues. This book is kind of key to doing that without, going to an outside counselor. I'm not saying not to do that, but I'm saying if you want to start now in the privacy of your own home, read it, have your partner or spouse read it, and then have a conversation afterwards. Open up those lines of communication.
Yeah. And I love what you said, like you almost put no fault to your marriage because you said, "Well, why would she be? I wasn't telling her anything anyways. So why is it now that I start speaking up that I should expect her to just be there?" And I do love the part of you just being so raw about these issues because so many first responders that I know say that exact thing. I don't tell my wife anything about the job. I don't want them to worry. I don't want them to think that I'm going to bad things. They fucking know you're a police officer. They know you're a paramedic. There's nothing, they're going to worry about you regardless. So be willing to share with them. And like you said, you don't need to share the nitty gritty details of what has happened, but share the emotions. Hey, I went to this call and that really bothered me because I saw a kid that was abused and I just feel for them.
Exactly.
Something so simple like that, you are going to see the compassion and you are going to see the support from your partner saying like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, go take some time alone. I'm so sorry. Go, after you're done, go hug the kids a little tighter tonight." And
And yeah.
it's within that vulnerability that you actually start seeing the support come for you.
Absolutely, and what's so ironic is that any first responder, we're out there every day, interacting with people out in the field, and we're giving advice. We're telling people the solutions. We're telling people what they need to do, but how often do we take the own advice that we're dishing out every single day to complete strangers? When we're
Yeah.
mediating family disturbances or family issues, and we're there on scene saying, "Look, we're listening to these people. We're saying, here's what you have to do. Here's what you need to do," and we know these answers, but yet when we go home, we still want to be that cop person or that person in charge, and we want to bark orders, and we don't want to have these open communications where everybody can voice their opinions and we can talk about our feelings and everyone has equal standing. And so it's really hard sometimes to get out of that first responder work mode and then come home and be that loving parent, that loving spouse to the other person when you've been at work all day, in cop mode or firefighter mode or paramedic mode.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best advice that I had actually got, to combat what we see and what we do is have outside friends. When you go out and you socialize, you know, not talking about the work because when you go out and you socialize with the people you work with, you are just going to continue to bring up the same calls. And however, that can be good and that can be very supportive for you, but make sure you have other people you can lean on that are not within this career. And the importance of that is, like you had said, we are working with the bottom 10% of society. These things that we go into, the grueling things that we have to see, and it gets, it skews our brain of thinking that the rest of the world is like this. And when you step outside, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're like, oh, I don't know how to talk to them. Like, I don't know how to talk to people that aren't first responders. You do it every single day. You talk to strangers every single day, whether it be a traffic stop, whether it be, these family disputes or, the car wrecks. Like you talk to strangers every single day. You can talk to your friends that are not first responders and you can have enjoyment outside of this job. And that is where, that ego gets let down and remembering that you don't have to have the badge on 24/7. There's other
Absolutely.
people. Your brothers are, brothers and sisters are taking care of night shift, right? There's other people. You can take your badge off. You can be a human.
Absolutely, and that's gonna save your relationship, it's gonna save your career, it's gonna save your life,
Yeah.
and like I said, it's
Abs
it's it's never too late to start, so if you're not doing it, start today.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The other passage that I really wanted to, be able to read was, let me find it real quick. Guys, I if you're watching this, like, I literally was taking notes on every single page. I was just like, here, I was in a groove. I loved it. Just things that you were talking about. And it's in a simplistic way. I think that is the really neat thing that it doesn't have these over extravagant, complex situations. It's just to the point and it's consumable. It is relatable. And like I said, I mean, I was able to, I'm not the fastest reader. I love to read, but I'm not the fastest reader. And I got this done in like 2 weeks. So props to you. Um, the other part that I really wanted to read was um, we may have to break down before we can become stronger, just as muscles get stronger after muscle fibers are torn. At other times, we need to learn to live good lives while in pain. Viewed in this light, it becomes easy to see how avoiding behavioral health issues is the easier, more comfortable path, while getting help takes courage. How did you take that step of asking for help?
So, about 4 years after my shooting, I ended up in federal court. We got sued immediately, and I had to endure a 2-week-long federal trial. And I had told myself for those years that everything would get magically better once this trial was over. I kind of hinged everything on that and blamed it. And we prevailed in the trial, but the trial itself was very traumatic. What I didn't mention earlier was that the man that tried to kill me had an identical twin brother, and he was there in the courtroom. So this face that I had in my nightmares for 4 years was literally physically, feet behind me in this courtroom for 2 weeks. And then just hearing all these crazy expert witnesses who were calling us cold-blooded killers, that we planted evidence that this person was never a threat to us. And so when the trial ended, even though we prevailed, that's where I really went downhill really quick. And that November, one of my best friends, his name is John Davison, and he has his own chapter in our book. He's a Vietnam veteran. He was also a 35-year reserve officer. When I was on duty as a day shift patrol sergeant, he tried to kill himself. And I just got to the trauma center when the ambulance brought him in. He was covered in blood. He had slit both wrists, stabbed himself in the torso multiple times, OD'd on multiple prescription medications. And I had briefly like 15, 30 seconds with him before they rushed him off to surgery. And I remember waiting there for hours in the hospital with other people from the PD, his sister who had driven up. I'd never met her, and just feeling this overwhelming sense of guilt and shame of why I didn't do something to stop it. Why didn't I see the signs? I mean, this was my best friend. And I knew he was going through some hard times, but I never imagined in my wildest dreams that he would kill himself. And so I started thinking about my young daughter and what would the effects be on her if I got killed in the line of duty? And what would be the ripple effects maybe on her children down the road? And so thank God he survived. And a month after that incident, on the anniversary of my shooting, so 2016, I remember I just broke down in my car for like 2 hours, just thinking about what my life had become and where I was going. And I finally pulled out my cell phone and called the on duty watch commander. And that's when I finally asked for help. And, I was so ashamed and embarrassed of that for years. I mean, literally, even a year after I retired, I didn't tell anybody what happened, why I retired, what I went through. But I now realize today that it was the bravest, most courageous thing I've ever done. It was nothing on the streets, nothing I did in the military, but literally it was just raising my hand and saying, look, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this by myself. I need help, and made myself a priority. And so, yeah, I look back now and I'm so grateful I did that because honestly, I would not be here today. I would not be living the life that I'm living. My daughter would not have a father. And so, again, everything happens for a reason. I truly believe that. And even the horrors I've been through, I wouldn't trade anything to get where I'm at today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, that's sometimes the struggle with the first responders is that we see these things and we're still willing to go back because we know our communities need us and we know that we have such a love and a passion for helping others. Like you said, we also need to be able to have that love and compassion and be able to help ourselves too.
Yes, absolutely.
When you had called in to your watch commander, what was kind of your guys' process within your department?
So, that call is basically anytime you're sick. Like if you're not going to make it to work, you're not going to show up. So it could be that you have a flu, you have a bad knee, whatever the case. So, you don't know who's working. You just call the watch commander's office. And in this case, luckily, it was one of my friends. He was an acting watch commander, and we've been promoted around the same time. And he was very supportive, very welcoming, very patient. We had a very long phone discussion. He made sure that I wasn't going to do anything rash immediately. And I didn't mention anything about suicide to him. I didn't go there because of the fears I had by admitting that at the time. I just talked about, the drinking, the isolation, the depression, the nightmares, and the effect that it was having on my health, my relationships, everything. And he was very reassuring. He got me in touch with a contracted therapist through our agency who was very good. She's culturally competent. He made notifications to the chain of command. He kind of got that ball rolling for me. And so he made that initial process very smooth and it went very well. I mean, honestly, I don't think it could have gone any better when I placed that phone call.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit of why maybe you were afraid to tell him you had suicide on your thoughts.
Well, the fact is, I was a sergeant. I was in a leadership position. I wanted to be chief of police someday. And with that stigma associated with, mental health and admitting that you need help, I still looked at that as being weak and shameful. And I worried about, people aren't going to want to follow me as far as my leadership position. They're not going to want to work with me or for me. They're gonna treat me differently, they're gonna outcast me, they're gonna have doubts on my operational capabilities, even though I've, had a phenomenal career in both the military and civilian law enforcement, and so it really came down to what other people's perceptions would be and their beliefs would be about me, and what would be those ramifications on future promotions or future assignments, and what it came down to was that even with that being said, I said, "You know what? My life and being here for my daughter is much more important than any position, than any promotion. And so that's why I made that decision because I realized that, you know what, it's a job. And as much as I loved it, as much as it was a calling, I need to focus on myself and my health first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do give you just so much, love for being able to say all of this here today on our podcast and being so willing to open up and share because it's things that people think continuously. I can't call in because I'm going to be, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be judged. I'm not going to be able to get the next promotion. And what really happens is you're continuing to hurt yourself. The more you do not speak up, you are only hurting yourself. And so, like you had said, you know, who knows if you could have even got to the chief of police because you could have, killed yourself in the line of duty.
Exactly.
And
I know I would have. Exactly.
yeah, and I just really commend you for being able to have that courage, let people know that you are not weak asking for help. You are so strong when you ask for help, and you are so strong when you are able to open up and say, I need help. Like it's your inner peace that needs the help. It's the inner, thoughts and just stories that we make up in our heads. Those are the things that we need help with. We don't get taught this.
Absolutely. And, you could be a badass. You can be, that SWAT stud out there, undercover, going on entries, making all these arrests and asking for help doesn't take anything away from that. Working on your mental health, it actually only makes you stronger and better at everything else that you do. And so again, that was my misconception. That was my misbelief that that was some kind of weakness and that it was going to hurt me. In reality, no, that's not true. Like it actually makes you a better police officer. It makes you a better firefighter. It makes you more compassionate when you're dealing with the public. And actually studies have been shown that if we support our first responders' mental health, especially for law enforcement, you're much more less likely to have a bad use of force or a bad shooting or a complaint for, swearing or talking to somebody, talking down to somebody, or being disrespectful, because you're not taking out that anger and frustration that you're holding inside. You're
Mhm.
dealing with it. And so you're treating people the way you should be treating. But it's not going to stop you from using force when you need to use force. It's not going to affect your decision making on whether or not you have to make that split second decision on your life or somebody else's life.
Yeah. What do you do now, Michael, for your mental health?
That's a great question because, I tell people, yeah, I went through this, years long recovery, but I'll always be in recovery. And to maintain where I'm at, there's things that I have to do. And so for me, I'm a structured person. And so when I get up, take my daughter to school, I go to the gym for 2 hours. And usually I go with a buddy that's either a veteran or an active police officer. So not only am I working out, but I have these trusted people that I can talk to, I can vent to. We have real discussions about our families, our relationships, our lives. So I'm not keeping all that stuff in. I meditate every single day. I go hiking on the weekend, so I'm out in nature, away from things and just embracing it, just the peacefulness, the tranquility. I still see a therapist. I don't go as often. When I first started my journey of recovery, I was seeing a therapist twice a week. Now, I may see a therapist once a month. But that's the thing is therapy is just talking to somebody. And I remember thinking before this journey that therapy was bad. It was for crazy people. And if you had a problem, it's like, no, it's just a confidential, trusted environment where you could talk about anything and everything. It could be like a crappy day you had, it could be a family problem, a relationship problem, maybe it's the job. Like I said, literally anything and everything, but you know that it's not going anywhere. You know that the person's not going to judge you and they're going to really listen to you and maybe give you some good advice. And so for me, that's maintenance. I still occasionally go to first responder support meetings. I'm a volunteer at the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat. So occasionally I go back for a week at a time and volunteer because I went through that program myself as a client. I believe in it. And so now I can see other people's grow. But what it does for me is it reminds me how far I've come because a lot of times we lose sight in our own recovery on just how far we've come. And when I go back as a volunteer peer, I go, man, I remember when I was sitting in that client chair. I remember how messed up I was. I didn't trust anybody. I didn't want to talk to anybody. And here I am now today where I'm openly talking about anything and everything, literally with the world.
Yeah. That is amazing. That reflection of seeing your growth is exponential. Um, and it takes time. These things, like you said, it is an ongoing process. You are never just, I'm done and I'm healed. Healing is a continuous thing. And like you said, the maintenance of that, just like you go to the gym, you have to continue to go. If you stop going to the gym, you start losing your muscle, right? And then it's just this yo-yo effect that keeps going and going. Instead, if we just do small chunks every single day to continue to give love and compassion to our mind and our body and our spirit, like that is mental health, right? That is clearing our mind, talking to people, getting tools, having a different perspective. You know, Therapy really is having a different perspective, that kind of third party, neutral, non existent, wider view to what is going on and help you through it. They're not sitting there and saying, you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do that. It's really them helping you bring your answers out.
Exactly, and you need to establish that trusted relationship early on, like, I waited till the big one, but you don't have to wait for the big one because when the big one happens, if you don't already have that established trust, it's gonna be hard to get to that trusted point where you can just openly talk about this stuff, so if you start out early on, and, you're just talking about maybe relationship issues or things at home, maybe bad call, when that really big one hits, whether it's personal or work related, now you have that trusted person that you can reach out to and you can talk to. And I didn't establish any of that. So even though we had those resources, I didn't believe in them. I didn't use them. So I didn't establish that relationship early on. So my advice is start that now. Don't wait till it's too late.
Yeah. And like you said, you never know when that big one is going to occur. And so if you are helping maintain your mental health and wealth within this, then when that big one happens, you may not be as, emotionally charged as if you hadn't been going through that therapy and hadn't been doing that personal growth for yourself. You could have, your tipping point could have been completely different. It's like you've already primed your mind, right? Of like, okay, this really big situation. You know what? The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to get help. I'm going to get support. I already know who I'm trusting, instead of, wow, this really big situation just happened. Now I need to reach out to somebody. And now I have all of these things. I don't want to tell shit to anybody. And now you're putting more barriers up in front of you instead of already having that all primed for yourself.
And that just happened to me. So actually, the last 2 weeks, I had three very significant things happen in my personal life, like huge. And they brought me right back to the height of my trauma. And the first thing I did is I reached out to that trusted person, and I needed it. And that's the thing, is that even a lot of people that go through recovery, they get to a point where they're like, I'm good. I've dealt with this. I don't need a therapist anymore. And no, it's like maintain that, because it's going to happen again. There's going to be more big things that happen in your life. Things happen suddenly. We lose family members. People get diagnosed with cancer. There's financial problems. Maybe you get in trouble at work, but don't just ever think like, I'm good now, I can stop this. Maybe lessen the frequency like I did. And then if you need to pick it back up and increase it, do that. But understand, you got to be flexible. Things change, and you may have to adjust what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely that adaptability within this. And I mean, first responders are great adapters, right? Like they're amazing adapters. Like they have so many great qualities, and so many people cannot do our jobs because they're like, I don't know what's going to happen all day. I don't know how you can, for 4 hours do nothing, and then now for 8 hours you're going like crazy madness. We love that spontaneousness and that every single day is different. First responders are adaptable, and being able to be adaptable with the mind will, like you said, will only make you a better first responder.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, the other thing that I was going, to remark on was you being out in nature and you doing, going and working out. So many people want to just put that on, building their muscles. That is building your mind as well. That is discipline. If you are putting yourself in those hard times and you are the one that is putting the pain on yourself, you are going to be prepared when the pain is inflicted on you from something else. You're already resilient. That is resiliency.
Well, I notice now too, when I don't work out, I notice myself that I get more irritable, I get less patient, and because there's things that happen occasionally where I just can't get to the gym that day. And I noticed within a day or two, it really has an effect on me. So it definitely affects not just your physical health, but it also affects your mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Nature, I am a huge advocate for nature. Get outside, go enjoy. I mean, nature can teach us so many different things. Go for a walk, with no music on. Like sit with your thoughts for just a little bit and what is happening. And that is where you build your self-awareness to say, like, ooh, I'm having some really negative thoughts right now. Like, what can I do about this? Instead of saying, I'm just gonna put some music on and not think about anything. Like it's good to think. It's good to think of what is going on, and that doesn't make you crazy. That doesn't make you crazy. It just makes you human.
Yes, but pretending like there's not an issue and that it's just going to magically go away, that's the issue right there. So you're exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. As we wrap up, Michael, what else would you like to touch on as we have this conversation?
Obviously the book, it's been out for a little bit over a year, and it was available on Kindle, hardcover, and paperback. But we actually just got out of the studio and we recorded it on Audible. It's not been released yet, but we recorded in our own voices. I mean, with emotion, with feel. I mean, it is going to be so powerful. Literally, it's going to be like hearing either Doc Springer or I at a speaking event or a presentation. And so, people need to watch out for this. I would say either a couple weeks to a month it's going to come out. I'm definitely going to post on it and update everybody. But that process, I didn't realize how intensive it is and how much it took out of me. I was physically emotionally exhausted after doing this project. But again, we're doing this so we can reach more people because I know there's a lot of people out there that really can't read a book because maybe they have TBI, from the military or work accident, or they just don't have the time to sit down and read a book. But hey, they're commuting, they're in the car, or in the morning when they're in the shower getting ready, you can pop in the audiobook and you can listen to it. And so I am so excited for this audiobook to come out because it's going to be a game changer. I mean, like you said, you could feel the power and the emotions when you're reading this, but imagine actually hearing it from our own voices.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just know with you being able to do that and obviously everything's a marketing aspect, right? You being able to put short clips out there, get the word out there just continuously is going to help the people around us. And I can't say this enough of how thankful I am, to have you on my side of the fighting forces of, getting these issues present. Like nobody wants to talk about them. And that's the issue is that nobody wants to talk about them. And so I have been willing in my life to say, you know what? Fuck this. It's gonna be me. And I am proud to say that. And I am proud to have you in my ball court and pushing through this because, you know, joining forces is how we are going to build this army to combat this.
It takes teamwork in this fight. And here's the deal, we all have our own story, and our
Yeah.
stories can heal us, but they can heal other people. You don't have to be a first responder. You don't have to be in the military, but every single person out there listening to this, watching this, you have your own story, and your story has the power to heal and help other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Be the person that you didn't have for other people. Like, build that you have that knowledge, you have that power. Be able to share it. Be raw, be real, be authentic, and being willing to share your story is helping people heal themselves. And it's magical. It's so amazing to see, and it's unbelievable when you start doing it and then you see like the fruits of your labor so quickly, like within a day, you can say something to somebody and then they feel connected. And then now they're doing it in their life. Now they're sharing with you how, when they were vulnerable, what came out of it. And it's like, oh, this is amazing. Like this is spreading so much love and joy and compassion. Like it gets me fired up. And I just could not thank you enough for being able to come on and be able to have the pleasure to be able to interview you and talk about these really, really sensitive subjects. It's not very easy for people to come on here and talk about, wanting to commit suicide, but your story is helping people understand and bring that light and shed the light on why our first responders need the mental health capacity of being able to help our communities and stay in these jobs. We want them to be able to stay in these jobs. We want them to be able to be healthy and strong and there for when we need them.
Absolutely. It was my honor. Thank you again for having me on, and thanks for all that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Raw Thoughts listeners, I encourage you to go. You can find him on Amazon. Get yourself a book. I would love to hear if you have read it, if you are going to be reading it, and have a discussion about it. I appreciate you, Michael. I'll have all of his information in the show notes. So make it quick and easy for you. And we will see you next week for another episode. Love you guys. Bye. Thank you again for listening to another episode of Raw Thoughts Podcast. I'd appreciate it if you could follow, like, subscribe, and share with anybody that you think would be interested in this. You could also head over to my website at rawthoughtspodcast.com and see any other guests that have been on the episodes. You could also go over to Instagram and follow at rawthoughts.podcast. I would really appreciate it, and always send me a message if you're interested in being a guest or any feedback.